All right. Hello, everyone. I am Kimberly Wilburn. I am one of the board members of Plymouth Area Indivisible, and I am joined by fellow board member Greg Layden. And we have with us tonight Ryan Winkler, who is a candidate for Hennepin County Attorney. And we will be having a conversation with him. I'm going to put just a little instruction in chat there. So if you have questions you want to ask, we will, if we have time, we will get to them towards the end of the session. And I'm going to respectfully ask Representative Winkler to not look at the chat because we've had the train goes off the tracks when our people delve into the chat. So Greg will be curating the questions and we'll get the questions to you, and that way people can be mad at us if they don't get their question asked. And we will have opportunity at the end to put all your information in, so if people have questions, they'll know how to get a hold of you and have that conversation. So with that being said, let's get started. If you could go ahead and just introduce yourself. Give us your 2-minute stump speech and, convince us why you're the person.
All right. Well, thank you for making this happen tonight, Kimberly and Greg, and for all that you do to keep DFLers and progressives activated and interested in politics. It's critically important that we do it this year because it's a challenging political environment and we need DFLers to be fired up. I'm very excited and privileged to be the majority leader of the Minnesota House. I have had the privilege of leading 69 DFLers from all over Minnesota for the last 3 years. I've been in the State House for 15 years and have lived in Golden Valley for about 15 years. I'm a dad. I have 3 sons, Edward, Isaac, and August, and I was born and raised in Bemidji. I dreamed of making our communities and our state better since I was a little kid. My mom tells a story, and she swears it's true, that I was 4 years old when I explained homestead property taxes to my 10-year-old sister. I'm running for Hennepin County Attorney because I think now more than ever, we need strong leadership in that office. Crime has been on the rise. Our sense of safety at home and on the streets has been undermined. Violence is claiming the lives of young people, and we are seeing guns across our neighborhoods. Racial disparities continue to be a huge problem in our criminal justice system, and at the same time, the most likely victims of crime are people of color. In our major city, a reduced police force has lost the trust of many of the people we have sworn to, or they have sworn to protect. We all want to be free from violent crime, and we want our homes and property protected. We want communities where families are not afraid of criminals or of law enforcement. We want a justice system that serves all of us, not just those at the top. Together, we in this election face a choice about what kind of public safety we want. We can have a criminal justice system that keeps us safe, builds trust, and delivers justice. We can choose that. And we can create it, I think, by electing leaders who will bring us together. The next county attorney has to understand the needs of all communities that the county attorney is trying to serve. And as both majority leader and as a candidate in this campaign, I've made a priority of working in partnership with our neighbors in the African American community, Somali community, Hmong community, Oromo, Liberian, Latino community, and many others. That's the kind of world we live in, and that's the kind of leadership we need. But we also need a county attorney who can stand strong in a tough political environment and continue to advance a progressive vision of criminal justice reform. I'm honored to be endorsed by every labor union that has weighed in on this race, including both AFSCME Council 5 and Teamsters 320. They represent both the county prosecutors and the public defenders. I'm proud to have the support of the DFL Veterans Caucus and to have the endorsements of diverse current and former elected officials, community leaders, and candidates from all across the county. We talked about this a little bit before we started at 7, but I've learned from many years in divided government how to find common ground and build on it. I've learned to work well with people from opposing views, even when they are extremely challenging to work with. A big part of leadership I have found is making the best out of tough situations without taking our eyes off of our vision of a community founded on justice. Hennepin County has outstanding professional prosecutors already. What it needs, finally, is an effective public leader. That's what I'm trying to offer as a candidate, and it's why I'm running. To work together with you and to show that it's possible to create the kind of public safety system we want. I have worked hard to earn your trust over the years as a leader in the legislature. And today, I am here to ask for your support to be your next county attorney. And I'd love to have a conversation.
All right, thank you. So let's delve into your background a little bit. So tell us what sort of trial experience you have. Have you been a defense attorney, prosecutor, that sort of thing? Tell us, all your degrees, whatever you want to share with us. And then any administrative experience that you've had.
Sure. So after leaving Bemidji High School, I went to Harvard for college and was a history major. I got involved in DFL politics as a college student and a law student. I returned back to Minnesota after college and went to the University of Minnesota Law School. And when I left law school, I had a choice between working at a big high dollar law firm or a small law firm that was working in Minneapolis to help support public-private partnerships. At the time, it was the Phillips Partnership and the Midtown Community Partnership to help create the Midtown Greenway and to help invest in the Phillips neighborhood for housing and jobs and crime reduction. So in that role, I was a litigator. I was also helping to represent public entities like watershed districts and really had a chance to do a range of legal work. When I left that firm, I also got elected to the State House of Representatives and went and started to work in-house at small technology type companies. And so since I have been in the legislature, first elected in 2006, I've maintained a law practice working in small businesses and also doing my legislative advocacy. So I have not been a prosecutor in the past. I have not been a public defender in the past. And my legal advocacy has been in the public arena has largely been as a legislator. As majority leader of the State House, we have about 400 House members and staff, and I serve in the number 2 position and chair the Rules Committee, which leads the House as an institution. So my administrative experience includes running the State House of Representatives, which is about the same size as the Hennepin County Attorney's Office.
Okay. So can you tell me, how do you define public safety?
Sorry, I was looking down. I'm at home and my kids are making noise and I'm trying to encourage them to just quiet down a little bit. How do I define public safety? I define public safety as people feeling safe in their homes and their communities and their day-to-day lives. And that means people in all communities, not just those who law enforcement has traditionally been assigned to protect. And it goes beyond just the feeling of personal safety to include trust that our criminal justice system is actually serving the needs of everyone in the community, and that the criminal justice system can deliver fair results, both in policing and prosecution, and an opportunity for redemption once people have been convicted of a crime. I think that public safety in that sense involves a belief in a shared commitment to safe communities, safe living for everybody. There are, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, that is the definition of what we're seeking to achieve in my mind. How we get there delves into a lot of issues related to long-term, related to poverty, related to trauma, the inadequate resources for mental health and substance abuse, the way in which our systems are designed for the people who work in the criminal justice system, not for people who are interacting with it. And so we can, I'm sure, dive into all of that. But fundamentally, public safety is only real when it applies to everyone and when it involves people trusting that the system is fair.
Yeah, so starting to delve into that a little bit, we are seeing, as we know, there have been increases in certain crimes, in particular vehicle thefts. And we are seeing a lot of messaging coming out of sort of the tough on crime message and blame on the increases, blaming the county's bail system and the county sentencing. So what is your response to that?
Well, first of all, you have to understand what is the most effective deterrent for crime. The most effective deterrent for crime is not a long sentence or a harsh punishment. It is the belief that you are likely to be caught and face some consequence for being caught. So if we're talking about a system that is leading to repeat offenses or people disregarding the rule of law, we have to make sure that we're actually effectively investigating and following through on crimes and allowing effective police work to happen. We're not seeing as much of that, particularly in Minneapolis, as we are in other areas. And it makes a big difference if people feel like something is going to happen if they commit a crime. Once you are arrested, there has to be some probability that you will face some appropriate consequence. And I think that a lot of this conversation is misses the point that having a consequence that allows a person to rehabilitate and to create a better life for themselves through the criminal justice system, through the experience of the criminal justice system, should be central to our idea about how we address crime. But simply saying we should lock people up, or we should have harsher sentences, or we should crack down with more aggressive policing, those things don't effectively reduce crime. And in the short term, I think we need more resources pooled together for investigation and follow through where police agencies are not able to do it effectively. And then I think we need to have a system where people are going to receive a speedy trial, where they're offered, if there's going to be a plea offer, it should be at the front end, not make them wait 100 days in jail and get a plea offer right on the eve of trial. That should happen on the front end, and there needs to be adequate judicial resources, public defender resources, and prosecutorial resources so that each case is treated as an individual act of justice rather than just an assembly line to move everybody through more quickly. And so we have to avoid the simplistic ideas that somehow being tougher means harsher. To be more effective in reducing crime, we have to make the system work better in every case.
And what do you think the county attorney's role is, if any, in advocating for addressing issues leading to crime? So poverty, homelessness, drug addiction, etc. The pandemic. So what do you think is the county attorney's role in that?
Well, that's where I really see a big opportunity and a missed opportunity in the past. The county attorney has a very big bully pulpit. And when there's a major prosecution or an arrest made and a charge filed, the county attorney tends to get the attention of the public talking about that crime. And that is an opportunity to advocate in the public arena for trauma-informed counseling in the jail system, or for more youth intervention, or stronger mental health programming in schools, for more effective chemical dependency follow-up and treatment. And so I think that there's been a missed opportunity in advocating for that in the public, but also convening stakeholders, convening elected officials, and convening parts of the justice system together and look at problems together and solve problems. The powerful thing about the county attorney is that the office touches almost every part of the justice system and has a role to play and has a voice in every part of the justice system, and can be a convener across jurisdictions to bring people together and say, how can we, if we have a person who is moving through the criminal justice system because they committed an act of violence, what else is happening in that person's family? What else is happening in the victim's family? How can we make this not be a cycle of violence that repeats itself? What do we need to do to provide better resources, or to get family or community resources to the table that can better serve the people who are going through this experience? It doesn't have to be a conveyor belt. It should be almost like an intervention into the problems in people's lives. Because where do we see crime? We see crime with poverty. We can't say that we're going to solve poverty at the county attorney's office, but we can say that we are going to push our systems to better address the problems that are associated with poverty, and things like accumulated trauma, things like untreated mental health, or chemical dependency that results from the lack of adequate ability to deal with trauma and mental health. So I think there's a big role, and it's one of the things that has me excited about this job, because I see this as a place where it's a blend between a hands-on, on the job impact in people's lives and a role to change systems. It's a uniquely positioned office to do that.
All right. So over the past few years, we've seen the county sheriff's department try some new things in policing. So can you give us an overview of that and what you think about it, and indicate if you think things have been going in a better direction, and how would you continue to alter and improve things?
Specifically with the county sheriff? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so first of all, some things have, but they've also been slow to adopt things like mandatory body cameras for all of their sheriffs. I think that has changed now, but that was a bit slow. They run the county jail, and I know that Sheriff Hutchinson has been interested in bringing more services into the county jail to serve people who are being held there. And of course, they deal with people in a really tough spot in life, but they're also dealing with people who are kind of, and they are there, and there is an opportunity to bring resources in to help them figure out a different path. I think those are very promising things. I also think the sheriff has had a positive role in pushing for de-escalation during high-profile, high-tension events, and has generally garnered the trust of people in law enforcement without sacrificing a lot of the trust that he had coming into office to make change after defeating Sheriff Stanek. So I think a lot of their initiatives have been positive. I think there could be more. I think the partnership could be stronger. I think that having a county sheriff and a county attorney who wanted to work together in partnership and together push for a change in systems, a change in practices, police practices, and other things as a matter of public safety could be a powerful team.
Okay. So we've touched on this a little bit, but let's dive a little deeper into. So Hennepin County as a county, and this applies at a state level, is known as a county that is really good at putting Black people in jail. So why is that, and what do you propose to do about it?
Well, I think there are things the county attorney's office can do on its own, which is not enough, but I'll start there. So better data collection to better inform at what steps of the process implicit bias may be shaping decision-making. That could be on charging decisions, that could be on bail requests, that could be on requests for upward or downward departures. It could be in what situations they strongly advocate for upward departures, not upward departures, but certification of juveniles to stand trial as adults. There really is not, what you say is true, but there isn't strong and granular enough data to help change the operations of the office to understand where they have bias and where they are making decisions that are furthering the disparities in the criminal justice system. I think that one thing that I think Freeman has done reasonably well is to diversify the office, not just hiring, but retaining people of color as attorneys. I think expanding that, making more leadership positions focused on diverse voices is important. I think making sure that people in the office who are doing the work are being listened to and are not expected to just charge every case that comes across their desk. Because another factor is, so data to help inform implicit bias. Finding better people or more diverse voices to catch things that are happening in the office makes a difference. I've seen that at the legislature. It's also true that they don't control the cases that are coming into the office. So police investigate, they bring a case to the county attorney's office. The county attorney's office decides if there's enough evidence that to warrant a charge. The perspective of individual line attorneys is often that they are told to prosecute every case, and they are not given much room to go to their supervisors and ask for departures in the name of justice. I think empowering individual attorneys and making it clear that they are expected to look at their cases in the interest of justice rather than just how to get the most convictions is an important way that the office can change. But the office exists in the context of a broader criminal justice system. They don't control how many cases of Black individuals that are being sent to them by the police departments. They can partner with police departments and look at what practices are leading to that happening and seek to work in partnership to reduce those disparities. That's one thing that can happen. I think showing up in communities is another way for the office to better understand how to keep a community safe without arresting or charging more people. Spending time in a neighborhood with a lot of violence and listening to people's stories, hearing what their challenges are, hearing what their solutions are, and looking for ways to partner and bring resources to the table is another way to reduce crime and to build confidence and trust without just trying to charge more people. And I think that there is a role for relationship building and a role both with law enforcement and with the community to try to figure out where these disparities are coming from and how, as a practical matter, to reduce the number of arrests that are being and files that are being sent to the county attorney's office to begin with. The last thing I will say is that these disparities don't exist in a vacuum. We have the worst disparities in the nation, or among the worst, in housing, in income, in education, in health. And the county attorney should be part of the advocacy work at the county, at the state, and in our communities to address the systemic disparities that we see. So there's a lot of ways from being very close in-house and very detailed, like data collection, to being a public voice for greater justice in our communities that the county attorney can help with. But we're not going to do it successfully. We're not going to address this successfully without building strong partnerships, strong relationships, and being directly involved in the community, listening to people and trying to solve problems together.
All right, so if you are elected, what are you going to do about guns?
Well, it's a challenge. Nobody can say that the guns are going to be off the street if you elect a new county attorney. I think that there are a few things that we could do effectively. One would be to enforce safe storage laws as much as we can, so that people who own guns are responsible for what happens to them. And that goes, we've seen that in high-profile school shooting case in Michigan. And we should be looking at ways that we can, if there's a felony case to be made, the county attorney can prosecute it. The county attorney could work with the city attorney, if it's not a felony case, to prosecute it, to make sure that the message goes out to people that if you own guns, it's your responsibility to keep them locked up and safe, rather than allow them to fall into the hands of people who are going to hurt others. That can be, by the way, hurting people who are going to hurt themselves. Suicide is a much higher cause of gun death than homicide is. But responsible gun owners need to then be responsible and be accountable when they're not. Another one is the illegal distribution of guns and straw purchasers. Those cases need to be enforced. Again, the county attorney cannot on his own or her own go out and do those investigations and find the cases. You have to work in partnership with law enforcement to make clear that the policy is to prioritize those kinds of cases. And then finally, in situations where people are carrying guns and they are not allowed to do so, I think it's important to focus on cases where people are possessing guns because they are engaged not just for self-protection, but because they are engaged in violent crime. And I think that when you look at people who are arrested, for example, with felony level drugs, they're convicted already and they're possessing a gun. Those are places where getting guns off the street are an opportunity to pursue the gun and simultaneously perhaps find a way for the individual to get treatment or get into a better pathway. So in a lot of ways for these gun cases, focusing on collecting the guns rather than incarcerating the individual for as long as possible would be the better approach. Our gun laws are very challenging to change. We've passed it in the State House. They're very hard to get on top of.
So I wanted to dive a little more deeply into policing and the relationship of the county attorney's office with police. So as we've mentioned, so police accountability, particularly when it comes in relation to killing Black and Brown people, members of the BIPOC community have been continually frustrated as what they see as a lack of accountability, and even the most recent case of the killing of Amir Locke, and the choice not to charge the officer. So can you speak to issues such as the no-knock warrants and decriminalizing youth, diversion of and police accountability? So.
Yeah, I mean, that's a series of topics, all related. First of all, on accountability, I think that we have entered a new age of police accountability that we have not seen before. The advent of not just body cameras, but also the average person having a camera is why Derek Chauvin was arrested and convicted. And every instance of an individual officer killing a member of the public is not going to result in a charge. But we need to continually use what we're learning from those instances to change our practices, change our systems, and change our policies. So I think the county attorney and I have proposed a independent police accountability unit within the office. I said the word independent is really important because the prosecutors do need to work with police officers on a daily basis in court, in making charging decisions, sometimes embedded together to address particular kinds of crime or in crime in particular cities. And so they have a relationship. I think it's a lot to ask an individual prosecutor to work with a police officer or a police department one day and then the next to make an independent, objective charging decision about that officer. So what I would propose is a group of prosecutors within the county attorney's office that not only look at charging decisions for things like manslaughter or murder, but for looking for how police officers are engaging in the criminal justice system. So people who have any kind of record of misrepresenting facts or lying on a witness stand, falsifying police reports, concocting stories that are after the fact and are not proven true. Those kinds of instances should have follow-up from an independent group of prosecutors in the county attorney's office to make sure that that evidence if it's tainted, is not being used, or if those officers are going to testify again, that there is a heightened level of scrutiny over any evidence that they may be presenting. I also think that that accountability unit can work with other justice partners to change police practices. So it may be working with civilian review boards, or with the chief of police in a city, or with a civil rights commission in a city, to identify ways that that city could improve policing in that city, because we have a lot of jurisdictions. It's not all Minneapolis, and in many ways, Minneapolis is the most challenged agency. But that accountability unit, being independent and focused on accountability across jurisdictions, is one way. I also, you asked about diversion and decriminalizing youth. I think that is really important. We need strong diversion programs. We have drug court, we have veterans court. Of course, juvenile court is its own separate entity entirely. But as much as we can divert people away from incarceration and towards a model where they can get their lives in a better place, I think is really, really valuable. Let's see. In terms of decriminalizing youth, I think the movement away from incarcerating juveniles is a good thing. I think that the challenge that we have faced with rising juvenile crime in the last year to 2 years has been a product and part of youth being disengaged and not in schools, of families and communities being under stress and not able to properly engage them. And when they have been arrested, not having an adequate system of community-based monitoring to make sure that they are following through on what they need to do. Just arresting a juvenile and releasing them to a family situation that wasn't good to begin with is not necessarily setting them up to get on the right path, and it's not keeping the community safe. And so stronger community partnerships with community organizations who can provide culturally relevant programming or responses in partnership with other parts of the justice system, I think, is a better way of dealing with juvenile crime.
Okay, I think you sort of answered my next question, but I'll ask again just in case there's anything else you want to ask or answer to it. So what I was going to ask is, so how, whoa, sorry. How, how will the county attorney office be able to maintain good working relationship with the police departments and then still be able to prosecute wrongdoing? You know, there have been allegations before that there hasn't been as vigorous prosecution of cases of police wrongdoing because of this relationship that's been built up. So if there's anything else you wanted to say to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there has been the distrust that you just cited is matched by the distrust of a lot of police departments, officers and chiefs of the same county attorney. And there needs to be, the county attorney needs to engage with police and look for partners of people who want to be reformers and improve practices and have a service-oriented mindset for policing. There are a lot of people who are doing a lot of good work in police departments across the county, and the county attorney should be working with them, and they should be listened to when we're talking about how to change things like pretext stops or sign and release warrants. We should be listening, not giving them decision-making power, but they should be at the table for discussion about how to effectively make those changes. I think the big thing that we need to create is a process, and I know that sounds lame, but it's really important. So if we end up in a situation where a police officer kills a young Black man, and the officer's conduct leading to a potential charge, there should be a process in place for decision-making that has been vetted ahead of time and is automatic. Right now, we have kind of an ad hoc approach where sometimes a case will be sent to the Attorney General for a charging recommendation. Sometimes it will go to a different county attorney's office. Sometimes it'll be done internally. And whenever there is ambiguity in that decision-making process, you create an opportunity for distrust, because the discretion to somebody will always look political. And that's the political environment that we live in today. Somebody somewhere, or some group of individuals, will say you're not doing the right thing and cry foul, and that tends to feed on itself. So what I would like to do, and I talked about this accountability unit for a range of work, but when it comes to a murder or manslaughter charge, I think there should be a process for that charging decision to be referred to an independent entity. It may be another county attorney, it may be a group of prosecutors from another office who will make a recommendation and send it back to the county attorney. The main thing is the process should be automatic. So once we have this situation occur, there's a process in place and those steps are followed to the letter. And then if that process has been vetted ahead of time and the community largely buys into what that process looks like, then the county attorney can be held accountable for following a step-by-step process rather than making a discretionary decisions.
All right, so I'm gonna let Greg ask the next question, and then if we have any anything in the chat that he wants to ask, we can do that too.
And thanks. People do put questions in the chat if you got them. Hey, Ryan, this is a question that I've only asked a few people. I've never got an answer because I think I ask it badly. So I'm going to try again very carefully. Okay. I believe that all of the members of government, legislators, governors, attorneys, all have some role in the criminal justice system. And in whether it's a bully pulpit talking about crime, or whether it's actual prosecutors, or whether it's people passing legislation and reforming or resisting reform, everyone's involved. I also believe that that corpus of leaders is forced, because we're in a democracy, to pay a lot of attention to what people say and what they want. And I think that our society is such, an American piece of our American culture is such, that when something bad happens, we startle very badly. And we react very irrationally and often just plain stupidly. And we don't care that we don't have the information that we need to respond properly. I'll give you one quick example. Maybe not so quick, but I think it's worth stretching out a little bit. I lived in Boston in the 80s, and a young prosecutor by the name of Bill Weld was operating in Long Island, and he shut down an entire Caribbean organized crime entity that it was working out of the airports in Queens. He just shut him down. It took him several months. Later, I got to know him later when he moved to Massachusetts, and he would not sit in a room without his back to the wall, and he brought his own Jack Daniels to the poker games because he was going to be poisoned or shot. That's how serious it was. That crime family moved to Boston, and from October to March of, I think it was 1986, there were 365 homicides. One for every day of the year, but just in a few months, and almost a perfect bell curve. It was that gang arriving in Boston and wiping out the competition and taking over. Okay, there were innocent bystanders too, shot. A lot more people were shot, and innocent bystanders were killed. And as that crime wave was increasing, people were hand-wringing and distressed and freaking out legitimately. And then when the crime wave peaked and started to drop, a lot of people were taking credit for having solved it and stopped it. Local community leaders in churches, the mayor, the governor, everybody took credit for going away. But it was something that happened entirely on its own without anybody causing it in the government or stopping it. Okay. We recently, I think we just experienced this in the Twin Cities, where we had a crime wave of hijackings. I haven't heard of any hijackings lately. I think it might have gone away. I think that we might have had a bell curve of hijackings. But if I go on next door to my local, next door chat place, everyone's still freaking out about hijackings. And it requires that we pass laws, put more people in prison, more police, get rid of, everything has to be changed in that direction. And we're going to be moving, our society is going to be forcing the legislature and the governor to get tough on crime, militarize the police in that direction over a thing that happened, went away. Okay. I believe that the public has to understand. It doesn't help that crime statistics are usually 2 or 3 years late. Like, you want to know the actual numbers, wait a couple of years, the data will be available. I think that is there a way that you can see that the attorney's office, maybe in cooperation with the criminal department, the BCA, I think they're in charge of this kind of thing, other agencies, to have a much more an outreach program where we learn the truth and the details and the trends real time, so we can know. All we get now is I open the local paper and I see a little police blotter thing, which is often somewhat humorous or sometimes scary, and I don't see anything else. I don't see any outreach from the government saying, hey, the carjacking thing, yes, you should still be safe, but you no longer have to lock yourself in your closet anymore over that thing. Is there any way there can be an outreach program that can help, or do you think this would be worth it? Help people be realistic so that they don't go screaming to legislature, add more, because what we see is we see Law and Order on TV. We see the TV show Cops, which desensitizes us to being bad to anybody. You can't, if you're a cop. We hear about the crime waves. We never hear about recession of crime waves. We never hear about the things you and Kimberly have been talking about. It's all scary stuff. Can we unstartle the population somehow?
You've asked an extremely big question, Greg, that really goes to the heart of how politics and our society work. Because sometimes the converse of that is it can be very hard to convince people that a crisis is coming until they experience it themselves. Which is, we see that play out all the time. I think that it's important for elected officials to not overreact and to try to level with people and be honest. I think that's really the only tool you have, is credibility of being honest. And that means saying, we can't solve this problem in a minute. You can't elect this person or that person and crime is going to go away. We've seen, I think, a decline in carjackings. I've talked to prosecutors about it. They believe it's happening because they worked more effectively across jurisdictions with police agencies to identify the people who were doing it the most and focused on arresting them and charging those individuals. We'll see how that plays out. But I think not over-promising or over-celebrating your success is a way to do that. But in American politics, as you point out, there's always going to be somebody who is louder, more extreme, and willing to say more outrageous things to garner public attention and to stir it up. And what I'm trying to do in this campaign, one of the things I'm trying to do is to use my voice to be a consistent advocate for constructive progress and change the criminal justice system, and address the fact that crime is rising. Their statistics support the concern. And if we can't acknowledge that and talk about solutions, we end up with leaving all of that space to be filled by people who want to use racism and dog whistles and outright racist statements to inflame people and create a backlash. So we need to step into it. We need to talk about it honestly and not leave that space open for radicals to take over, especially on the right, to take over and try to push people into extreme policies. We made that mistake before. Democrats made that mistake before. Democrats were too afraid to be honest about crime and violence. And as a result, we have a lot of the policies we're trying to unwind today. Maybe they couldn't stop it, but they could have done a better job of being a brake on it.
Dale, I see your hands up. Can we first go to a question that came up first in the chat, which gives me an opportunity to reference a John Sanford comment, our famous local person who helps us understand how the police are by writing novels about them. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is called the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minnesota because in Minnesota we catch the bad guys. That's the story. What role can they play in oversight of police wrongdoing to preserve, this is from Laird, to preserve the city attorney police relationship? And do they have a role now? What can they be doing?
Well, they do. They investigate every single officer involved shooting. I think the issue is whether the BCA, because it is populated by people who come up through law enforcement in Minnesota typically are truly independent enough to do the investigation. That's been one of the charges against, or the criticisms of the BCA in the past, is that they're not independent enough from law enforcement and they work together a lot. That's one of the reasons why I think having an independent unit, Hennepin County is the biggest prosecutor's office in the state by far. There's a lot of resources there. Having an independent unit that could help on police accountability would provide another check in the system. We can't just leave it all to the BCA.
It's interesting that if you have a housing association and you get your, every 5 years, you have to do a kind of a review of all of your properties and everything. People who do that don't come from Minnesota, usually. And there are companies that do that are in California, Texas, big states. They fly in, do it, and leave. There could almost be a interstate review system where you're not even living here. It's just a few airfares you're adding on there. It's a bit expensive. Anyway, Dale, do you want to ask your question? Unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. I want to bring up a problem that's been dogging us for decades. It came to my attention several decades ago by a Minneapolis police chief, Tony Boza, who referred to certain employees, police employees, that he referred to as thumpers. And Boza kept running up against the problem of unions, police unions, protecting the thumpers from proper management. I don't know if that's within the wheelhouse of the county attorney's office or not, but I wonder if you have some thoughts to add to that problem.
Well, I think it's correct. I think that's an accurate statement. The Police Federation in Minneapolis in many ways has been more powerful than any chief of police has been, or the mayor. I think when I have talked to people in law enforcement, so police officers, police chiefs, others, they all point to Minneapolis and say it is badly run. The practices and the culture there are toxic. They all feel like their experiences in other law enforcement agencies have been much better. And almost all of those law enforcement agencies have unions as well. A union is essentially a right to due process in management decisions. And an effective management team can use a union due process system to provide appropriate discipline, to enforce policies, and to weed out individuals who are not acting appropriately or who are violent. It should not be the case that, and we talk about Derek Chauvin. He's not the only one. He had a extremely violent history against individuals in the community, and he was designated to be a field trainer for people coming up in the police department. That is not a union issue. That is a failure of supervisors to properly assign people. Even if Chauvin is still on the force, right? I mean, take that question aside. There is no way that any effective management organization would say that he should be supervising other officers who are young and coming up. So I think the union issue is real, but I think Minneapolis has a history of failed leadership of the police department from elected officials and police chiefs who have not created the right kind of culture. And this is anecdotal. I don't know if it's true, but when you talk to people in St. Paul who've been in and around police leadership, they say basically St. Paul has had the same problem, but about 20 years ago, they started to consciously try to change the culture, change the practices, and change the expectations within the department. And over time, it has worked. Minneapolis, I think, has reached the point of a third of its department gone. The level of distrust at higher than it ever has been. The feeling that the police in Minneapolis are not serving the public They're not showing up when they need to be there. Don't have the capacity to investigate. I think it's reached such a point that the only path forward is the Department of Justice investigation that's underway and a consent decree to reorder the police department. Meanwhile, they're going to have to find a way to work across jurisdictional lines with other police departments to try to investigate and follow through on crimes on a triage basis, a hotspot basis, to figure out where the most resources need to go. But, you know, we have a uniquely bad police department in the biggest and most important law enforcement entity that we have in the state. And we need to address it collectively. It's not just a Minneapolis problem. Rather, it's a problem unique, especially bad in Minneapolis, but it's not just up to Minneapolis to fix it.
Well, who else besides Minneapolis would be a party to that, to a cure?
The county, both through the prosecutor's office, but also the sheriff's department being able to help step in, the state to help step in with better investigation resources. The federal government can do it. Other police departments can help. And then this U.S. Department of Justice investigation is very likely to find a pattern and practice of civil rights violations and to require the city to enter a consent decree requiring it to change how it's operating.
Thank you.
Okay. So I want to ask a question from the chat, and then I might ask you some more questions about the discretion the county attorney has. So this is a question from Michael. How have you prepared yourself to make a transition from a career as a legislator to a county attorney?
Well, for one thing, I have spent a lot of my time familiarizing myself with the practices of the county attorney's office and the people who are doing the work. I've had a lot of one-on-one conversations with individual attorneys in the county attorney's office. I have started attending court as an observer, which any member of the public is allowed to do, so that I have a better understanding of how the processes work, who the people are who are coming through, what kind of discretion the county prosecutors are faced with, and how to there's just no substitute for showing up in the space, listening, observing, and seeing what's happening. And you could have a lifetime in the courtroom doing this work, and that would obviously provide you with that window. You know, I think that it's possible it's very much possible to familiarize myself with how these courts are run every day. I've also spent a lot of time in communities in the last year and a half, building relationships, listening to people's stories and hearing their concerns. I've been an advocate at the legislature and a partner in getting funding out the door to community violence interrupters, people who are trying to create youth programming and other intervention services, and have found that by showing up in the community, listening to people, not with defensiveness, not with an ego, but just hearing people out, taking their frustrations on and trying to find a solution to problems together, and then following through, is really the core of what builds trust. And I think there's the technical aspect of understanding how to be the county attorney and what's happening in the prosecutor's office. There are great prosecutors there, but there's also the understanding of how a public safety leader can establish relationships and build trust. And I've been trying to do both of those things.
Okay. Can you speak to what discretion does the county attorney have when it comes to charging, and what, if any, influence does the county attorney have when it comes to sentencing? And then, sort of out of left field, but you've talked about, wanting to set up this separate division that deals with officer wrongdoing and prosecution of those. Are there other things that the county attorney can do? Like, say you become aware, from watching body cam footage of an officer that's a particular problem, maybe not to the extent of criminal uh, what can the county attorney do in those types of situations?
I think if the information becomes is available, first of all, the county attorney can work with the city attorney, who is responsible for ultimately, at least in part, with policing the police department. So that could be the Minneapolis city attorney, that could be the city attorney for any other city, and it could essentially identify the problem and look for ways to solve it together. The county attorney has a huge amount of discretion on what charges to file based on individual cases coming through. And we haven't even talked about the fact that our police system is designed to look for people who are committing crimes of violence, drug crimes, property crimes. We have effectively little or no enforcement of fraud, of white collar crime, of environmental crimes. We don't have investigation resources of labor trafficking. We could do a much better job of dedicating resources to domestic violence, to trafficking of sex workers. There's all kinds of violations of the state statutes happening every day that are not really investigated. So for the county attorney to just sit back and say, well, send me whatever cases these police departments have, is already exercising, it's failing to exercise discretion in a certain way, because you're just accepting what's coming in rather than proactively looking for investigation tools or investigation partners to help find others who are committing felonies that may have as much an impact on a community as a drug crime will. I mean, for example, the Northern Metals facility in North Minneapolis has been pumping out particles in the air that harm people. They've falsified records and they've had civil charges. They potentially could have criminal charges, but right now there's no system in place for looking for those criminal charges from that kind of act. And so what I think about the discretion of the county attorney, it's also about working in partnership to build more investigation tools to look at other kinds of crimes that are happening in the county that affect a lot of people. And in many cases, the very low income communities that are affected by crime are affected by environmental damage, they're affected by fraud, they're affected by labor trafficking, all sorts of things. And we're not really looking to help in those cases, and we should be.
All right. I'm just looking to see if anybody else has questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat and we will try to pass them on.
Is there anything, Ryan, that you think that we have not even hoping to say why we should, well, first of all, just to be clear, presumably a lot of people here are delegates and this is being recorded. So this will be, you know, a lot of the delegates in our purview in our core area here will be seeing this. How is this process going to work? You're going to go to a convention. Tell everybody what the process is like of moving forward towards becoming the current county attorney.
Sure, I was just going to say we haven't talked much about the campaign. So it's a nonpartisan race, which means that in November there will be 2 names on the ballot, and those names will not have a political party or any other ideological statement associated with them. It will just be 2 names. The primary election in November will advance 2 people to the general election, regardless of party. So in this current race, 6 people have announced for county attorney. All are DFLers. 5 out of the 6 are seeking the DFL endorsement. So and it could change, but as of now, we could be sending 2 Democrats to the general election ballot in November in the August primary. The DFL endorsing convention on May 14th is important. It's important to me because I've been engaged in the DFL party my whole adult life. I believe in the convention system, and the values of the DFL are critically important in this race. So it matters to me, but it's also very important in the campaign because it allows us to work in partnership with other DFL endorsed candidates. And I think that's why everybody's pursuing it, but it won't decide the race. It won't decide which one candidate will advance. The primary will do that, but it's different than the usual party primary because two DFLers could come out of it. And I don't think we would want to reduce the number of Democrats to one running in this race as a result of this convention. I think we should endorse, and it's valuable, but the primary will decide which two go to the general.
Right, and that's worth noting, underscoring, because people, whether or not you accept the endorsement is a contentious point in some races, but that doesn't really apply to the county race the way it works. So it's yeah. Good.
And the other thing is, Hennepin County is the largest in the state. It's a quarter of the state's population, 2 congressional districts in size, roughly, and it's a low dollar race. You can't raise the millions of dollars that you see in other political campaigns to get the kind of name recognition across 1.3 million people that you would expect. So being organized, being on the ground, doing great field work, working in partnership with other DFL candidates is really the best way to run this race. And it's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, and maybe we should have started with this question, but we didn't know how much time we would have. So tell people, what does the county attorney do?
Sure. If, as has been obvious over the last hour, the county attorney prosecutes felony crimes in Hennepin County. About half of the lawyers in the office are prosecutors and about half are not prosecutors. The office has a little over 200 lawyers and just about 200 staff. So there are about 400 attorneys and staff in the office, half dedicated to the criminal side, half to the civil side. In addition to prosecuting felonies, the county attorney also enforces child support, is involved in child protection cases that are referred to it from the child protection services in the county. The county attorney's office represents the county as a government unit, anything from issues related to mass transit, all the way to questions of whether the HCMC has engaged in some inappropriate activity related to ketamine. So it's a huge range of issues that the county attorney's office takes up. Of course, prosecution is the thing that gets most people's attention, but having an effective civil side of the office is important for the success of the county and its mission.
Okay, I have a question from Mia, and well, I'll read it and then I might try and add on to that. Okay, so she's talking about a specific case in Bloomington. A mother of 3 was recently murdered by her ex, whom she had a restraining order on. Her children worried every single day that they would return from school and find her dead, and their fears came true. And so Mia is wondering about the possibility of having ankle bracelets on those who have restraining orders and have threatened the life of someone or are known abusers. And then I just wanted to add to that, in that we know that the vast majority of women that are in prison for murder or manslaughter killed their abuser. So what is your response to the practice of putting these women in jail?
It sounds a lot like self-defense to me. And obviously you can't, in every case, you have to look at the facts on its own and can't make sweeping generalizations. That's not, that isn't the right thing to do. But I have to say that I'm going to put this. One of the foundational reasons why men and women are unequal in our society is because of violence and the threat of violence. That can happen in the home, that can happen out in the community, that can happen in a lot of ways. And Hennepin has not been the leader it could be on addressing domestic violence, on addressing sex trafficking, on addressing sexual assault. And it's not to say that it's not an indictment to say that, you know, that they aren't doing their job. They are, but they could be national leaders in addressing it. And I would like to do that. I don't think that one of the challenges, I talked to a person who does domestic violence cases at the county. I said, what are the barriers to your success? And we know that the cycle of abuse is such that the victim, who is often the only witness and the only evidence in the case, will decide they don't want to proceed with it. There can be economic reasons, right? They depend on this person for their housing. They live in their house, in that person's house. They may depend on them for a lot of reasons. And the cycle and psychology of abuse itself makes people often retract their statements or controvert what they said previously to police. It makes prosecution of that individual very difficult. The county attorney's office right now does not have access to an expert witness to tell a jury about the cycle of abuse and why it is that victims often change their statements. And so it looks like the best or most important witness testifier is not telling the truth or is inconsistent. And it is a way for the public defender or the defense attorney to blow holes in the prosecution's case. I said, why don't you have an expert witness who can explain this? And they said, well, we don't have resources. I don't know, we just don't have them. I said, that's ridiculous. There is advocacy. All it takes is for the county attorney's leadership to partner with advocacy organizations, to ask the county board for more resources. That should not be a barrier. And it goes to two things in my mind. Number one, it hasn't been enough of a priority. And number two, the county attorney leadership has not engaged line prosecutors, line attorneys enough to ask what the shortfalls are, what the barriers are to being able to do this. So I think and I know, I mean, I've talked to many, it's almost always women who have a restraining order, and they are afraid of the day that the restraining order goes away, or they are afraid that it's not going to be followed, and they feel that the burden is all on them to protect themselves in a system that doesn't care. And I think that has to change. I think that the county attorney can be a partner with police and police agencies in saying that we are going to prioritize this kind of protection, that this tradition or this history of believing that women are making these stories up has to end. The idea that somehow it's okay to use violence or threats of violence to coerce people into any kind of act is completely abhorrent. And we still have, it is far too common, and it needs to stop.
No,
I just want to say last thing,
Sure.
It is an issue of men and how they act and what they think and how they are excused by their fellow men.
Right. And I know, so I'm thinking the possibility of ankle bracelets, that would be
I'd have
not
to
something that,
maybe. I mean, it's a civil rights issue. You know, could it be part of a civil protection order? Maybe. I'd have to dig into it. I think there's a lot we can do. But that, I mean, I'm open to it. I just have to look into it in more greater detail.
right. So can you speak more about prevention, root cause strategies? So how can we move to prevention? So I think the person is asking like for some specifics, I think.
Yeah. Well, for two things. First of all, most crime is committed by people somewhere between the ages of 15 and 35. Most people age out. So root cause starts young. It starts in early childhood. It starts in having what we just talked about. It talked about safe homes, about the law being enforced against people who are hurting people in their household. And it starts in having adequate mental health and social work support for families in crisis. We don't really do it now. Our schools are not providing it enough. And the trauma of a child is that a child experience replays itself in violence later. And you can see it in how they are doing in school. You can see it in how they are cared for. And working to provide resource and the challenges that the county does social services and the schools provide education, and they don't effectively coordinate. The criminal justice system can see when things go very badly, and they're not effectively tied in to either. So building partnerships to prioritize resources where the trauma is greatest, to me, is the best early intervention strategy. There are efforts underway to do this. People know that this is true. People know and say they want to do it. I think that there is a role for a county prosecutor. In part, the county prosecutor is also a truant officer. So once you reach a certain age, the county attorney actually has a role with enforcing school attendance. That could be a way into identifying families that need more help. But then it continues on up the line. There's no youth center in North Minneapolis, for example. We have under-resourced communities to the point where there is nothing for young people to do. I have 3 boys. I have 2 teenage boys. The time between hockey season and lacrosse is a time when they are very challenging to deal with. And I think of a whole bunch of young men with not much to do. It is not a surprise that a certain number of them get into trouble. So we have to have the kind of, it's not just stopping trauma, it's also providing hope and opportunity and mentorship and supporting community organizations that are doing work to help. And then it comes on the other side too, as people are if they're incarcerated, what kind of services are being provided to them? What kind of reentry work? And how do we stop a criminal record from stopping a person from getting a job, getting housing, getting their life underway for decades to come? That also is something that through expungement work, the county attorney can help with.
So can you speak a little bit to what you know about outcomes for children who have parents or guardians incarcerated, and what that looks like versus other sorts of program, in-home monitoring, other sorts of accountability?
Well, I know mostly about, I know more about mothers of young children than I do about parents in general. I will say that. So we're slowly moving to the point of treating women who are incarcerated with young children or who are pregnant. We're treating them more humanely. We're moving in that direction, and that has fortunately become a bipartisan cause. People who are being shackled in childbirth, for example, is a practice that we have now, at least in the law, ended. And making sure that there can be a family connection, a connection between a mother and child, is something that people are working to shift the mindset about. And I think that's really important. So in my mind, we are just going to be repeating the trauma if we are separating people and separating kids. And if you have a violent parent, spending all your time with them is not a good thing, right? I'm not saying that. But where the criminal activity may be related to a mental health issue or a chemical dependency related issue, we should be trying to find less restrictive ways through diversion to help have there be accountability for the individual and what they've done, but not create collateral consequences in the next generation because we're not paying attention to it.
Can I interject something? We have usually we have an act we ask people to do at any Indivisible meeting. We didn't plan one. I had hoped I entered into the chat ways that you could join Plymouth Indivisible and get on our list, but I would like to suggest something. I just did it. I just sent a letter just now to my representative in the House, to the Senate, and to the leadership, asking them to consider whether in between other jobs, legislation to support the development of youth community centers in our urban areas.
Well, the good news is we're working on it. And it's called the Gordon Center. It's a Minneapolis school building in North Minneapolis. Several years ago, the city, the state, the county, the school district got together and said they wanted to create a women's shelter at that school building. And the community around it said, we have a lot of trauma here. We don't need another trauma center. We actually need a positive resource for our youth. Could you instead create a youth center in this building? And as soon as they said that, the deal fell apart. Nobody wanted to do anything. The building is still sitting vacant. I heard that story last year and have been working with several organizations, and we now have a bill moving at the legislature. The school district has shifted ownership of that building to Hennepin Community Partnership, which is going to own it and work to develop the building as a youth center. Representative Esther Agbaje, who represents that part of the North Side, is carrying the bill. Representative Fu Lee, who's our chair of Capital Investment Committee, is supportive of it, and we're helping to try to get this established as a thing right now. So the Gordon Center project, specifically on the North Side, where there's the YMCA, but that first of all, that costs money. It is for younger kids, and it is not really geared to help with teenagers have a safe place to be, because that's another part, just safety in the community. They're looking for a place to be outside of school that feels safe. And so that project is underway. Can't guarantee we'll get anything done. You never can make guarantees at the legislature, but it is underway and it's moving.
Great. So you just need about 15 of those.
Well,
Esther's a real dynamo. They're going to lose her to something bigger, like a cabinet position or a governorship or something, but she wasn't born in the United States, so she can't be president. But that would be a great project to support. I'm really glad to hear about that. And you do need a bunch more of them, even, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just one of the prime examples of how there's no substitute for showing up, listening to people, hearing what's happening in their neighborhood, in their community, and what they say they need, and then work in partnership with them to try to make it a reality. That's how we do this.
So do consider as an act, hearing from what you're hearing tonight, think of something that you want somebody else to hear and do something about, like your senator or your representative, and send them an email. Or just go and yell at the county attorney or somebody. I mean, whatever you feel compelled to do, just do it.
Even if you feel like yelling, it rarely works.
So is there any other legislation that's being worked on right now in regards to public safety that you want to share with us?
Well, I mean, we have a lot. The House DFL with the leadership of Speaker Hortman and with me and with our public safety committee have really been pushing a lot of changes and investing in the kind of community-based public safety systems that are shown to reduce crime and make people safe. And so we've done that. We did that before George Floyd was murdered. We were able to push a lot of things through in that summer because frankly, Republicans felt they finally had to. And we're continuing that again this session. So we are in fact, we're doing both through the legislature and indirectly more money for community violence interruption groups and youth intervention and jobs support. We are putting money through grants to communities to decide if they want to hire and retain police officers or invest in community resources. It's sort of up to the individual community. We are continuing to push for accountability with body cameras by funding them and then requiring certain policies related to the storage of and availability of body cam footage. And I personally am working on legislation to diversify police departments by creating a recruitment pathway for diverse candidates into policing, and not just diverse, but also those who have demonstrated a servant leader mindset when it comes to public safety and policing, which is a model developed in Ramsey County and works very well for having the right kind of people wanting to be police officers and having them also have more of a lived experience in common with the community. So we're trying to increase the number of officers available to hire like that, because all the police leaders I talk to say that's who they're looking for and they can't find enough.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I will, if we'd like to take the time, or one of your people that has joined you, and put your website, email, whatever information you want to in the chat so that people know where to find you and how to get a hold of you. We can go ahead and do that. And Greg, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we end?
No, just thank you. And we are going to be having another forum next Wednesday, and we'll eventually have, I think, every candidate in one of these forums. So everyone who's a delegate will be very well informed before you go to the, and thanks, Ryan. That was very hopeful and helpful. And I think it was an excellent conversation.
Thank you. And Kimberly, I promise you, I have not looked at the chat. So I'm not going to be putting my name, I'm not going to be putting anything in there. I'm going to ask Chris or Letitia or Alyssa to do that. And I found the conversation to be really valuable too, and appreciate that you put this forum together. We're all the candidates are trying to reach delegates as much as we can right now. And I think it's really good to have kind of an exchange of ideas and views and questions for everybody to see who wants to participate that way. It's good for us, and I hope it's informative for everyone.
All right. Night, everyone.
Good night.